All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This training is Bridging Across Political Differences, and it is co-hosted by the Democracy Resource Hub and the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, NCDD. I'm Kiva Hummel, NCDD's Executive Director, and I am joined here by my colleague Duncan Autry, along with many other friends. Duncan is a librarian at the Democracy Resource Hub and the founder of the OmniWin Project. We're so grateful that you chose to spend your time with us, especially at a moment when the skills needed to bridge political differences are so important today. Many of you are here because you're navigating this work in real, complex settings across your communities, organizations, families, institutions, and civic spaces, and often with uncertainty, pressure, and very real stakes. Today's session will be a chance to learn from experienced practitioners who work across political, cultural, and ideological differences in various ways. Rather than offering a single framework, this training is designed to surface how different people think about this work and the range of approaches they use in practice. You'll hear about the kinds of situations speakers are working in, the approaches they tend to use, and how they think about the strengths, limits, and trade-offs of these approaches. As you listen, we invite you to stay curious. What feels relevant to you in your own context? What might you carry into your own setting? And where an approach might not fit with the situations that you are navigating. This session is not about arriving at agreement or prescribing a single right way to do this work. It is about expanding your sense of options and sharpening your judgment about how to engage across difference. Our hope is that you leave with language, insight, and a few ideas that you can use, not a sense that there is only one right way to do this. And with that, I'm going to pass to Duncan for some additional thoughts.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here. As Kiva said, I'm the librarian for the Democracy Resource Hub. And this is a project of the Shift Action Lab. And this year or last year, I guess, been on a sort of listening tour across the democracy movement to find out where are the needs and what do people really want to learn. And this topic of how do we bridge across political differences was the number one most popular question that came up, and obviously it's really important. Um, as you're going through today, I just encourage you to pay attention to like what are the concepts, the ideas, the skills that you feel like you can bring back home to your communities, because that's really what this is all for. And and so the goal is to make this useful for you. And the best way to help us really, double down on that is please use the chat, elevate the things that are standing out for you, and feel free to use the Q&A and ask your questions, because that is going to help inform the sort of product that we'll build after this project, to be able to share with the world going forward. So anyways, thank you all so much for being here today. I'm so excited to be co-hosting, and grateful to Kiva for the help in putting this together. And I'll pass it back to her for some framing and take us through what we're up to today.
Wonderful. So we're going to go through a little bit of housekeeping next, and then provide our speakers with an opportunity to introduce themselves and share more about how they're showing up into this work of bridging across political difference. Duncan's going to share a little bit more about the Democracy Resource Hub Learning Series. We'll share a little bit more framing of this training, and then we'll go into lightning round presentations where each speaker is going to share a little bit more about their work. We'll move into a panel conversation. And I want to encourage, as Duncan just mentioned, throughout this conversation, we are going to invite questions through the Q&A feature, which I'll share a little bit more about in a moment, as well as take in some of the questions and feedback that we've received from the pre-survey that some of you filled out as well. And after that, we will move into closing. So some brief housekeeping for us today. The chat is open. Please say hello, share where you're from, connect. We'd love to know what is drawing you to this training. Please keep the chat respectful and on topic. Thoughtful reflections and helpful links are always welcome. Use the Q&A box for questions. You can find that down in the bottom of your screen, oftentimes in the More tab. If you click that, you can open the Q&A. That will send a question directly to the host and all the panelists, some of which can answer these questions live. And also in the Q&A feature, we'll be bringing these in. But this helps to uplift your questions so we don't miss them in the chat. There's going to be no breaks in this training, so please take breaks as needed. And this is going to be recorded. And so we will be providing you a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck afterwards. And with that, I'm going to invite each of our speakers to introduce themselves and share what unique aspect of your work relates to bridging across political difference. And we'll start with Pierce.
Hey everybody, such an honor to be here. I'm Pierce Godwin, founder of Listen First Project and the Listen First Coalition of 500 organizations who are bringing Americans together across divides to turn down the heat and find a way forward together. I am also a senior director at Urban Rural Action. I live in New Bern, North Carolina, and my work as a backbone leader for the National Bridging Divides movement and my work in local communities with Urban Rural Action is about bridging many different lines of difference among fellow Americans, political, racial, religious, generational, economic, geographic, and others. But of course, survey research confirms what we all witness, that our political divide is the most salient and toxic one today. So my work nationally and locally addresses that line of difference as a critical dimension.
Hey there, I'm Bo Harmon with Engage Right. I live in Leesburg, Virginia, about 40 miles west of DC. And so if you're in that area, would love to be able to connect in person over coffee or lunch or if further away than by phone call. I am a longtime Republican political operative. I was U.S. Congressman John Linder's campaign manager, then U.S. Senator Saxby Chambliss's campaign manager. Then I worked for a cycle at the National Republican Congressional Committee doing communications. Then was campaign manager for Maryland Governor Bob Ehrlich before taking a senior campaign role with Senator John McCain's presidential campaign. In 2016, when the tenor in the party changed somewhat, it no longer felt like home for me. But my conservative orientation did not dissipate at that point. It just felt not at home in the current iteration of the Republican Party. And so that led me to the bridging world and trying to better understand how to build bridges with new Republicans, with my new friends who were mostly independents and Democrats, and understanding that world better. I worked with Represent Us, a nonpartisan nonprofit working on democracy and election reform in states around the country for the last several years. And during that time, really noticed that so many of these nonpartisan nonprofit organizations have a real blind spot in how to effectively engage conservatives. And so that led to launching Engage Right. And I look forward to sharing with you some of my perspective on how to bridge partisan divides in an explicitly political advocacy sort of environment. So that's my background, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you today.
Hello, my name is Katie Heighton. I'm one of the co-executive directors of an organization called Essential Partners. Essential Partners works in all 50 states. We worked in DC, Puerto Rico, and 29 other countries as well. But I personally am based in Denver and get to hang out with Kiva sometimes, which is really fun. And we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but Essential Partners really focuses on building systems and cultures of dialogue and we notice that the patterns that we see playing out in political polarization often repeat in conflict or disagreements about other issues, and even sometimes in daily challenges like budget meetings, even personality styles. And so our work at Essential Partners is to help people certainly have political conversations more effectively across differences, but also equip them to build cultures where they're able to have existential and everyday conversations about differences moving forward. And so it's a really beautiful organization that I look forward to sharing a little bit more about. It's also a really wonderful one for myself because even as we talked about this at the beginning, as I lean more progressive these days, I was also raised in a military Christian family that is more right-leaning. And I love my work at Essential Partners because it allows me to be my full complex self with a firm conviction in my own experience and my own values, alongside a real belief in work to make better decisions when we make them better together in that complexity. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am unmuted. All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Akade calling in from Toledo, Washington. Toledo is a small town, about 500 people in rural Washington state. So our motto is the other Toledo, the other Washington. Ruminant Resolutions is the name of my personal business where I offer trainings on things like dialogue, depolarization, de-escalation. But the element of my work that I'll be sharing with you all today that's kind of my unique selling proposition is working with people with extreme ideologies and those who are prone to or have committed political violence. And so I think that political violence is one of those problems where it's not the most common. Community violence is far more frequent than political violence or ideological or extremist violence, but it has a huge impact on the polarized atmosphere and landscape when it does happen, as evidenced recently by things like Charlie Kirk. So that's been most of the background that I'll be sharing with you today.
Great. So again, after as I said before, for this last year, we've been running the whole, I've been talking to people from across the movement. This is the Democracy Resource Hub Learning Series. This is a project of the Shift Action Lab. There's not much more that I need to say, except for that we've already had 3 events. There'll be more coming up soon. And you can find out more information about that. And we'll put in some information about the link for that and the registration links and so forth. And also just a little tech comment here for folks that are trying to figure things out about the getting the spotlight versus the slide deck. There's a little slider between the picture and the thing that you can adjust that for yourself so you can make the slides bigger or the people bigger. Hopefully that helps whoever was looking on that.
Great. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for that logistic aspect.
Yeah.
And to frame us up before we move into the lightning round presentations, we're going to frame this training a little bit more. We're living in a moment where political differences are not abstract and often feel less like disagreement and more like rupture. They show up in our neighborhoods, workplace, families, and daily lives. Many people are avoiding conversations altogether. Others feel pulled into conversations that escalate quickly or seem to go nowhere. And many are unsure how to begin, when to intervene, or when to step back. Yet we are all part of a shared society. And whether or not we agree on how it should work, when people feel scared, hurt, unheard, or are unskilled, it's very human to default to avoidance, shutdown, or escalation. That doesn't explain every situation or excuse harm, but it helps us to understand why these patterns show up so often. It reflects how hard this work actually is, especially when the stakes feel high. Bridging across political differences is not about being endlessly patient or perfectly neutral. It's about developing practices that help people stay in relationship, navigate tension, and remain human with one another. Like any practice, these skills are built over time through use, reflection, and adjustment. The reason this work matters is not just to reduce conflict, it is because our ability to live, decide, and act together depends on it. Stronger skills for navigating differences create stronger connections, better collaboration, and more resilient communities. Today's session is grounded in the belief that this work can be done. Not easily, not perfectly, and not the same way in every context, but through intentional practice, thoughtful design, and learning from experience. You'll hear some approaches that prioritize different things. Some focus on building strong containers over time. Some focus on meeting people on their own terms and in their own spaces. Some focus on reducing harm, de-escalation, or creating pathways for action. As you listen today, we invite you to notice what resonates with the challenge you are facing, what feels useful for your context, and where might you need something different than what you've tried before. With that framing, I'm so excited to bring in our speakers. Each brings a distinct lens shaped by real experience, and together they offer a grounded picture of what bridging across political differences can look like in practice. Now we'll move into our lightning round, and you'll hear directly from each speaker about how they approach this work. And first up, I'm very proud and excited to invite Katie to share a little bit more about her work.
All right. Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I apologize if you can't see me as well as the screen. I'll let the tech folks on the back end work on that. And while I do so, I just want to do a little bit of introduction of Essential Partners and how we work. So Essential Partners equips over 3,000 people every year to build a world of thriving communities strengthened by difference and connected by trust. This looks like directly working with over 60 communities and institutions to support really long-term and lasting change. In addition to that really long-term deep work, though, we work with over 20,000 people every year with ongoing support, coaching, and public resources that impact 2 million people every year. And we've been really honored to do this work for 35 years. And we pride ourselves over those 35 years in working really deeply with our partners over time, meeting folks where they are to scale impact across the country and the globe. What makes us different in this space especially is that our organization was founded by family systems therapists. I actually share that just because it can help understand how we think about communication as happening within a system. It's not uncommon for people to want to support better communication, for them to focus on individual skills, maybe to de-escalate conflict or to support one-on-one interactions. But if we only focus on individual skills, we don't address the fact that conversations don't happen in a vacuum, that they exist inside of a system, maybe a relational system, a classroom system, an organizational system, a societal system. And these systems actually reinforce patterns of communication that promote some ways of being and discourage others. As systems theorists say, every system is perfectly designed for the results it gets. So if we only address individual skills, we miss a big piece of what makes conversations difficult. Because in the moment where things get really hard, it's really hard to access those individual skills, even if we worked really hard to cultivate them. So our work at Essential Partners focuses on addressing that system and patterns of communication that really make constructive dialogue hard, especially across political differences. We ask can we go back one more, Kiva? Thank you. Our approach, called reflective structured dialogue, acknowledges that dialogue isn't rocket science. When we're our best selves, we know how to have tough conversations. But the fact of the matter is, when we become upset, we can't really access our best selves. So we work to bake in the design of conversation structures that disrupt what's getting in our way and invite people's best selves. We see dialogue as a leverage point to make systems work better, to actually become how we do things around here. So instead of putting the burden on the individual to use all those communication skills, something the research tells us is really hard, we work to change the cultures. So I want to talk a little bit about what this actually looks like. Now, because communication is cultural and conflict is cultural, our approach is by nature flexible that can be used almost anywhere depending on how people plan to use dialogue, but we tend to lean into certain things no matter what. I'm going to start by just showing a little tip and trick from my co-executive director, John Saroof, for one tip on how this looks before I jump into the big picture.
Any difficult conversation or any family holiday, I prepare myself by always having a question in my pocket. I know that at some point, someone is going to say something that touches a nerve, something that has me feeling provoked to an argument, where I will be tempted to say something dismissive or ask, yeah, but what about this point? Which will only escalate the conversation. It's for those moments that I keep a question in my pocket. Mine is usually something like, I really want to understand. Can you tell me why that's so important to you? Or, is there a story behind this belief? I would really love to hear it. I know we often give the advice to stay curious when in a difficult conversation because we know it works. And it's not always easy to do that when the topic is meaningful to you. So rather than relying on my own ability to stay curious when the heat is on, I'm prepared. I have a question in my pocket.
Thanks, Kiva. So, while every one of us can do little things like that, like having a question in our pocket in advance, our work oftentimes takes place in those long-term partnerships within institutions, within systems. We offer coaching and consultation, training, facilitation, and direct support. We also work within the cornerstones, what we call the cornerstones of community life, where people are already living, working, worshiping, and studying together. This looks we do a lot of work in education institutions, but also in civic spaces, faith and religious institutions, and nonprofits and community-based organizations. So what this means that we don't do, we tend to not be an organization that works with strangers to build theoretical common ground or have theoretical conversations. We want to work with people whose lives and futures are intertwined in some concrete way. We tend not to do one-off programs or short professional development seminars on their own because we think that it's not our best use case. I often recommend many of the other people in the space for that work. We don't necessarily focus on finding agreement or common ground, although we often invite people to collectively find ways to move forward together, even in the absence of common ground. And finally, we don't operate as DEI trainers, although we do work kind of at the intersection of conflict resolution, DEI, and community organizing and organizational development. So I'll share a couple of examples of what this looks like, a little bit about how we know, and a little bit about how we know this works before I close and hand off to Pierce. So just a couple of examples of what this actually looks like. We've partnered with the University of Connecticut since 2016. And in doing so, we've trained a bunch of folks. They've also created a home for this work in a really amazing office called the Democracy and Dialogues Initiative. It's based in their Human Rights Institute, and they do incredible work. Last year, they had 57 dialogue programs alone. To date, they've also trained 1,000 people in this work. And we've also worked with a lot of faculty, bringing our dialogic classroom curriculum to their faculty, which has made it possible for them to actually include a dialogue graduation competency, ensuring that all 20,000 plus undergraduate students will experience dialogue during some time at their experience at UConn moving forward. So we see this work really take place over time as a blend of skill building and coaching and consultation to really embed this into and now it is just how they do things around here, which is incredible. On the community level, we've worked for a long time with a county in Maryland called Howard County. And we've worked with interfaith leaders who are committed to building really strong interfaith community in their county. A hub of them have engaged 62 unique faith congregations and drawn over 300 people into each dialogue series that they offer, We've trained over 100 community members to support conversations about race and religious bias. And as a result, we've seen participants actually develop their own interfaith potlucks, book clubs, learning sessions, and visits to each other's neighboring synagogues, mosques, and churches. Their work started in 2018 and continues today. And as a result of their work, we've been able to build a public dialogue guide, which has been downloaded 1,000 times every year, which is just incredible. So we see this kind of scaling impact where it's not just about that one county or that one congregation, but it's how they've built relationships and community moving forward. So oftentimes this is really hard to imagine what it looks like. And so we pay a lot of attention to what our work makes possible. And we have peer-reviewed case studies and over 4 decades, but what I want to highlight is just a couple of pieces of that impact and a couple of quotes from the people we work with, because ultimately they're the best experts in this. The first thing I want to talk about is greater trust. We see that people after working in dialogue report feeling greater trust in people who hold identities, values, and perspectives that are different than their own. About 94% of our participants, 93.8. But what that means too is that we see people shift their perspective on how their institution operates. That 58% of people across institutions where we work, not just the people we've trained or the people we've worked with, but everyone across these institutions, begins to see more openness to non-dominant perspectives across the institution after just 2 years of partnership with us. And one of our faculty members who teaches us in their classroom said that in the past, conversations seemed more competitive, with students vying to be the most knowledgeable or woke. But after doing this work, students were really open to each other's perspectives and respectful of the differing levels of knowledge they came in with. Their students said that this teacher creates the safest educational academic container I have ever experienced. We also see impacts in long-term social cohesion. So we just ask if people feel like their community is more cohesive. And overwhelmingly, we see an improvement after working with us, even just 6 months after an interaction. But after 2 years, we talked to people across these institutions, and 51% of them say they were part of a successful collaboration that wouldn't have worked well in the past. Really working across differences in a really concrete way. We also see 45% of people experience that someone who holds different identities, beliefs, or opinions reach out to them for collaboration following this institutional partnership. So one of the things that I love to see is our partners talking about this work, and they said, one of them said recently, I feel the climate on campus has maintained a positive outlook despite everything that's happening in our country and the world. I feel more unity in the community and desire to support one another. Other years, it has felt like everyone is doing their own thing. So I'm honored to start off this panel. I'm really excited to hear from the rest of my panelists, and I hope you all stay in touch with us as well. On the screen here, and I can put in the chat as well after this, links to our open events and our free resources. Most of our work does take place in long-term partnerships. You can always reach out if you want to talk about that. But otherwise, I just really appreciate y'all being here, and I will hand it off to a dear colleague and friend, Pierce. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. Beautiful presentation. Essential Partners is a pioneer and pillar of this work, so much that we can all, and I continue to learn from Katie and her team. Given my past decade as a backbone leader for the Bridging Divides movement, I'm going to first offer some broader reflections and learnings that are rooted in my personal story, and I hope they'll be helpful to you. I'll then share a bit more about the concrete work that I'm most focused on now as a practitioner. So I began my career in DC, working on Capitol Hill for Republican Senator Elizabeth Dole. I then spent 4 years as a national political consultant, conducting voter micro-targeting for major Republican campaigns coast to coast. In 2013, I headed home to North Carolina, but first spent 6 months in Uganda, Africa, with a Christian International Relief Organization. Now I was in a place of abject material poverty, but I was struck by this incredible relational wealth despite those circumstances. And in checking US headlines before returning home, I realized that my country was becoming just the opposite, a place of immense material wealth and opportunity, yet relational poverty threatening to tear it all apart. Wrestling with that juxtaposition kept me awake on an overnight bus ride, and I channeled my distress into writing a blog post simply called It's Time to Listen. I posted it from an internet cafe in Nairobi the next morning. Little did I know at the time that the fresh perspective I'd gained by stepping outside my comfort zone, by exposing myself to backgrounds and beliefs different from my own, and the space I had on that bus to imagine a different path would change the course of my life. That humble blog post calling on Americans to listen first was published in major papers across the US and elicited an enthusiastic response. Encouraged by that resonance, I launched Listen First Project to try to do something about it. 4 years later, in 2017, I realized thankfully that I wasn't alone on this mission. I discovered a few other organizations bringing Americans together across divides to build understanding, trust, relationships, and solutions, to turn down the heat and find a way forward together. And I felt like those of us doing that work could have a greater impact together. So I launched the Listen First Coalition with 5 organizations, and one of them was NCDD. Today, there are more than 500 organizations in the Listen First Coalition, and Listen First Project serves as the backbone support for the movement. That means building community and coordination among partners, amplifying hope and opportunity, and assessing impact. Let me tell you about some of my failures and disappointments over the years in hopes that you won't have to learn these lessons the hard way as I did. Honestly, I've been deeply humbled and gotten, I hope, a little bit wiser in my vision and approach going forward. Those who know me know that I jumped into this mission with unbridled exuberance and ambition. Quite dangerous, given that I had no idea what I was doing. I've been compelled to quit my marketing job and commit full time to this bridging work by the tragedy that you may remember in Charlottesville in August of 2017, when marches escalated to murder. I wanted to host an event in Charlottesville a few months later, bringing in my early Listen First Coalition partners to help the community heal. Long story short, I got burned and may have even done damage in Charlottesville by coming in from the outside without a foundation of trusting relationships, putting on a high-profile public event, and seeking to engage everybody at once. I went headfirst into the hornet's nest. The event got sucked into the toxic vortex to such a degree that many people who'd planned to attend told me they were physically afraid to be there, and very few people showed up. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't take the time to learn from people with the experience and best practices to guide me before jumping in with well-meaning but ultimately reckless abandon. Had I reached out to people like Katie at the time, who'd been doing this work longer than most of my early close partners, I could have avoided the quagmire and a painful failure, but I didn't. The lesson I hope you all will take is don't dive in before benefiting from the wisdom of those who've gone before, already failed, already learned those hard lessons, have the scars to prove it, and have the wisdom to guide you. And the fact that you're attending this training proves that you have that humble, curious mindset toward this work. So you're already well ahead of where I started. As I think about the 8 years since that hardest lesson, I'll describe my experience as both further humbling and hopeful. On the humbling side of the coin, attempts at big national campaigns have not attracted as many people as we'd hoped. I've long wanted to go big, reach the masses, perfect the message, master the marketing, and make a significant national level impact. Coalition partners and I have taken several swings at that vision with millions of dollars and support from some of the biggest brands in business and media. But it hasn't worked yet, and I'm not sure that it ever will. I've seen that many people distrust invitations to bridge divides. Toxic polarization has only gotten worse. Violence is increasing. Some of the people most active in our politics and culture have turned their backs on America's founding vision of prospering as one and instead focus on destroying the other. and many of our fellow Americans have lost hope for a way out. But on the hopeful side, I've witnessed rapid growth in the movement. The Listen First coalition of 500 plus orgs is only the tip of the iceberg. There is a wellspring of efforts. You're going to learn more about some of them today toward peace and unity in communities, in places of worship, in classrooms, and workplaces across America. So if you believe that America is a country worth fighting for and that the only way forward is together, you are not alone. Hopefully you'll be convinced of that today. I'm also getting a lot of hope out of the fact that we've, as Katie talked about for Essential Partners, measured real personal impact on those who participate in bridging initiatives. Interventions across the field, evaluated using the co-created Social Cohesion Impact Measurement, SCIM tools, have had the most meaningful impact on outcomes such as valuing listening, affective polarization, self-efficacy to bridge divides, self-efficacy to create a bridging community, anger, respect and understanding, and intellectual humility. Another source of hope for me is that we got a growing body of research that now guides our work. I want to share with you all a couple of actionable insights that you may find valuable. A report by More in Common called The Connection Opportunity finds that, quote, Americans are most interested in working across lines of difference to achieve a mutual goal that improves their community. Similarly, people say that the condition that would make them most eager to connect across lines of difference is, quote, if we had a common goal we were working towards. Supporting those insights, the Trust for Civic Life found in a survey of rural community members that, quote, taking action with other community members to achieve a specific outcome, whether around an everyday problem or a more formal community-wide issue, was strongly tied to feelings of trust, agency, and belonging. The More in Common report also found that what they called intergroup anxiety, the fear of having an awkward or uncomfortable interaction with someone from a different group, is the strongest impediment to connection across difference. And, big shocker, Americans are most apprehensive about connecting across political differences, which is perhaps why you're here today. Their fears include that it would be uncomfortable, that they'd be misunderstood, and even personal safety. Now, finally, on the hopeful side of the ledger, I've gained much hope from seeing meaningful transformations at the local community level. As my friend Daniel Stidd has observed, quote, on the one hand, our national politics and governing institutions continue to spiral downward in a doom loop of polarization, dysfunction, and delegitimization. On the other, we can observe green shoots of promise and pluralism in many communities across the country as Americans join forces to tackle challenges they face, end quote. Having pursued national level impact for many years, allow me to share my own realizations regarding the indispensable role and unique promise of local work on this mission to bridge divides across America. I've realized that change moves at the speed of trust, and trust moves at the speed of relationships. Meaningful relationships, especially across differences, develop best when people are in proximity to one another. With the forces of toxic polarization making us feel further and further apart, realize that finding literal common ground, shared neighborhoods, towns, or counties can be an increasingly effective starting point. And local work is also just more insulated from the outrage industrial complex that's running rampant at the national level. Caricatures of other people promoted by cable news and social media are much more likely to ring hollow if you actually know those people by name. Polarizing issues become less frightening when you're working across divides to fill potholes in your own local community. So seeing that greatest impact at the local level and those realizations has inspired me personally to shift focus from my national movement backbone role to work on the front lines of the mission in local communities, including my own. And of course, across the Listen First Coalition, I've seen countless impactful efforts towards social cohesion and collaboration. Slide. In scanning the landscape, I chose to join my friends at Urban Rural Action because their Uniting for Action local hubs work impressed me as community-led, action-oriented, built on highly accessible, memorable, and practical tools, and fun for participants. Slide. Our Uniting for Action local hubs empower communities to increase social cohesion, to boost civic participation, and strengthen local institutions. Next. We seek to do three things in our local hubs. Bring community members together across differences to solve problems where they live, enhance civic participation skills across the broader community through workshops hosted in third spaces such as libraries, building skills in collaboration, community engagement, and community safety. And three, make local institutions more responsive and trustworthy by helping local leaders strengthen their collaboration and community engagement skills. Next. In all that work, one of the guiding principles at Urban Rural Action is having fun. We feel like one way to alleviate that intergroup anxiety that's illuminated in the More in Common report and to cut through our shells is to just lighten up and have fun together as humans. At UR Action, we believe that play and fun help us get creative, build and sustain relationships across differences, and recognize our common humanity. The fun activities, just to give you all some ideas that we integrate into our gatherings of Uniters, include scavenger hunts, rock, paper, scissors tournaments, team trivia, paper airplane contests, the fishbowl game, songwriting and performing, neighborhood walks, meals at restaurants, Uniters bingo, human problem tree, truffle tasting, this is the tasting series, chocolate tasting, cheese tasting, coffee tasting, cupcake tasting, and to get another sense in there, lavender smell contest on a farm. I also want to quickly highlight two of my favorite UR Action tools among others that you might find useful. Next. The ABCs of constructive conversations trains and then has participants practice A, asking to understand their perspective, B, breaking down our views so that they understand our reasoning, and C, checking our understanding of their perspective. So if you're like me, and I dare say most Americans these days, we spend a lot of time in B and not as much time in A, asking to understand perspective, and C, checking understanding. So that's where this workshop is impactful in teaching those skills for constructive conversation. Next one. Also just want to highlight the problem tree analysis. We create these problem trees to analyze complex societal problems across systems and identify opportunities to affect positive change. What are the causes? What's that core problem? And what are its effects? Next. In going through that process, Uniters or community members attending a workshop are going to define the problem, map out the effects of the problem, map out causes of the problem, map out available resources that can be harnessed to address the problem cause, and identify a single cause to focus on in their local project that is supported by a community partner. Next. And again, I love our accessible, memorable, and practical workshop offerings for communities and organizations, which you all might find valuable as well. Across those buckets, I outlined the skill areas of collaboration, community engagement, and community safety. Your Action offers 8 different workshops: dialogue across differences, managing interpersonal conflict, problem tree analysis, designing community interventions, stakeholder and influence mapping, know the warning signs for someone on the way to political violence. We'll get into that in just a minute. Decoding violent content, and de-escalation. Slide. So if y'all would please just email me if you're interested in learning more about these workshops for your own work, your organization, or your community. Also want to let you know that at conversation.us, Listen First Project, as the backbone organization, offers a range of great resources, what we humbly think are the best of the best from across the coalition, that are designed to be really accessible to help everyday Americans begin their bridge building journey. The final thing I'll mention is that as a conservative like Bo, I'm really passionate about better welcoming and engaging my fellow conservatives in the work of bridging divides. In the Chronicle of Philanthropy last year, I offered lots of practical insights and tips for those wishing to better engage their fellow Americans who are conservative. I'll put that piece in the chat as a compliment to what you'll learn from Bo. I'll also post in chat a story that Judy Woodruff did for PBS NewsHour a couple months ago. in which Judy came to our annual Bridging Movement Summit, where a couple hundred leaders gathered at George Washington's Mount Vernon to interview me about that conservative engagement. And then she went to Wisconsin to see how Urban Rural Action's local hub has been so successful with conservatives. Thanks so much for having me.
Hi there. Thank you, Pierce. That was fantastic. And you will notice that one of the core findings in our effort involve literally listen first. So that's something that you will hear echoed from me as we go along as well. Next slide, please. Next, please. One of the ways that I come to think about relationships between conservatives and progressives is I think of a mom with a really bright kid, 4 or 5 years old. She regularly is asking this kid questions, about colors and shapes and animals and numbers and what is that? How is that? How do you spell that? What do you do next? And she pulls up to a traffic light one day and asks what she thinks is a super easy question. She says, "What color means go?" And the kid says, "Red." And she says, "Are you sure?" And he says, "Yep, red means go." And she's confused because this is a really easy question, especially the way that she quizzes him all the time about different things. And soon she realizes that he's sitting in a car seat in the back, can't see out the front windshield that she can. And so he's looking at a perpendicular light. And when that light turns red, they go. And when that light turns green, they're stopped. And so, next slide, please. Perfectly reasonable people with the same reality, same mother and child observing the same traffic light, same intersection at the same moment in time, but very different perspectives based on their proximity and providing a very different view of what is happening right there. They each draw perfectly rational conclusions based on the information that's available from their vantage point. And we have probably a crystal clear example of that happening in the United States this week with the shooting in Minnesota. There's a big portion of the population that sees a radical leftist agitator who was blocking lawful federal law enforcement operations, tried to run over and kill a law enforcement officer who responded in self-defense. And we have another equally sized portion of the population who saw the federal government murder a citizen in cold blood. They're all watching the same video. They are drawing radically different conclusions based on their perspective and their reality. Next slide, please. One of the things that we need to think about when we do this sort of work is how different um, people's perspectives on issues are. One of the core way to get to that is exactly the name of Pierce's organization is listen first. Understand their concerns, understand what they value and why, understand what their motivations are and why, understand what their political constraints are and why. Most organizations start with the solution. They say, how do we convince conservatives to support XYZ? We've got this terrible problem and we've come up with a great solution, and now we just need to get conservatives to sign up and be on board. That's not collaboration. We had a client come and, several years ago when HR1 was coming through at the beginning of the Biden administration, and they were like, how do we get conservatives to sign on to HR1? And the answer is to start over. It's like asking, how do you get progressives to sign on to the Save America Act? You don't, because you're starting from very different places and trying to solve problems in very different ways. And you're never going to have collaboration in that sort of a circumstance. Next, please. So there are no magic words if you don't start with collaboration. There's no naming it patriot voting that's all of a sudden going to get the result that you want. It requires genuine engagement, genuine uh, seeking, genuine curiosity, and then seeking shared objectives and shared outcomes, and requires a flexibility on your part on how you achieve those outcomes and those objectives if they are in fact shared by both sides. But there's no messaging tricks. I mean, so often we spend so much money on polling after we've already got a policy written up and our solution zipped and sealed and ready to go. And how do we write this in the right way and say this in the right way to get conservatives on board? And it's never going to work right unless they've been part of the conversation since the beginning. Next slide, please. And that's one of the real fundamental difficulties that a lot of organizations come up against, is that you have to sincerely be planning to help the other side. You have to understand their political incentives. If there's an election reform, ranked choice voting, or open primaries, or proportional representation, or any of the others that are out there, if that's not going to substantively help conservatives and Republicans win elections, there's no reasonable reason for them to sign on to that. I mean, just because it sounds fair to you. It doesn't sound fair to them if it's not going to help them win elections. So durability truly requires mutual gain, that both sides get something from the interaction. And that listening first part, I remember one time when we were in Arizona in 2003, and the Republican legislature was all up in arms about voter fraud and stolen elections and all of that. And there was a real effort underway to eliminate vote by mail in Arizona, where over 70% of the voters use that as the way that they vote. And they were going to eliminate it all of a sudden out of nowhere. So we were obviously opposed to that and worked to sit down with some of those legislators and really understand what they were trying to do. And it turns out their concerns were really twofold. One is that they were fearful that the voter rolls were not accurate and that therefore hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of ballots were being sent to people who didn't exist, who had moved, who had died, and that um, they were being then collected and voted fraudulently. And because the state doesn't allow processing of mail ballots until after the polls close on election day, there would be hundreds of thousands or millions of mail ballots to process, and they couldn't do that until after the polls closed. And so it took several days to get election results, and conservatives were afraid that that's where fraud can sneak in. Oh, I see we're down 60,000 votes. Let's see how many mail ballots we have to count before we get that, was their concern. So they didn't really have a problem with mail voting. They had a problem with unclean voter rolls and processing time of absentee ballots, both of which are very easy to solve without eliminating the voting mechanism that 75% of your voters use. Next slide, please. Language, while there is no magic words that will help you if you haven't coordinated with conservatives from the beginning, there are some words that can keep doors closed if you're not careful. And this is some advice from an organization called Third Way, and I want to read how they describe this because I think it's helpful. For a party that spends billions of dollars trying to find the perfect language to connect to voters, Democrats and their allies use an awful lot of words and phrases no ordinary person would ever say. The intent of this language is to include, broaden, empathize, accept, and embrace. However, the effect is to sound like extreme, divisive, elitist, obfuscatory enforcers of wokeness. To please the few, we have alienated the many, especially on cultural issues where our language sounds superior, haughty, or arrogant. We're not out to police language, ban phrases, or create our own form of censorship. Truth be told, almost all of us have used these words and phrases in different ways in our own work. But we must recognize that much of the language above is a red flag for a sizable segment of the American public. It's not because they're bigots, not because they fear cancelization, but because they fear cancelization, doxing, or trouble with HR if they make a mistake. Or they simply don't understand what these terms mean and become distrustful of those who use them. So instead, they keep quiet, they don't join the conversation, they leave it. Next slide, please. And it's words like therapy speak with triggering and othering and microaggression. It's organizer jargon, calling things food insecurity or housing insecurity instead of saying somebody's hungry. Person who immigrated, identity correctness with Latinx and birthing person or chest feeding. These sorts of terms are meant to be inclusive and meant to be supportive of people with differences. But when you're talking with conservatives, it can often be alienating and shut down conversations before they can even begin. Next slide, please. If you want to work at the grassroots level, it's important to make sure you go where conservatives are, engage beyond progressive spaces, show up and show goodwill and familiarity. Ask to present at a local GOP meeting. Next slide, please. What this does is it shows respect for these spaces. It demonstrates genuine effort and interest. It demonstrates a commitment to real partnership and working together. Next slide, please. And you need to have realistic expectations about what happens when you do this. When you go and set up a booth at the county Republican convention for ranked choice voting or proportional representation or whatever your issue might be, you're not going to have immediate conversion and high enthusiasm. What you might get is some curiosity, people being appreciative that you showed up. You might have some interesting questions that reveal that you have some similar concerns, and there may be some ground to work together. Next slide, please. But a lot of times it's difficult for organizations to do this. They start with the solution. They don't appreciate the incentives and pressures on the conservative lawmakers or vote leaders. They use confusing language and that can be off-putting or alienating. They treat compromise as capitulation. They only show up in friendly spaces. Listening first and doing the hard work to really co-create solutions, next slide, please, is how we end up making durable policy. Next slide, please. Asking, are we approaching the audience the right way? Are we leading with our objectives rather than with our solutions? Are we showing good faith and negotiating in good faith? Are we willing to compromise and be flexible on achieving our ends, even if we're not willing to compromise on the objective or the result that we need? We're being flexible on how we achieve that. Are there operational barriers, such as what are we doing to put up barriers? How are we building relationships? How are we measuring impact? Next slide, please. And that impact needs to not be measured with, did we get a lot of converts today? It's, did we start a conversation? Are we starting to build trust? Is there some common ground that we can build from? Do we recognize the same sort of fundamental issues and problems? There is some really, really fascinating work. I noticed that Andrew from the Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University had signed on. They have done a fantastic recent study looking at 2024 Trump voters and the differences within some of that voter group. They designate sort of three separate columns, roughly a third, and a third of Trump first Republicans who are basically willing to do anything that he wants and support that. There are party first Republicans, and I think of people like Mitch McConnell in this column, of people who may not like him personally, but are willing to work with him and deal with him because it's in the benefit of the party long term. And then there's Constitution first Republicans, and I think of people like Liz Cheney or Tom Massey, kind of in that column of people who have very sincere principles that they believe. And if Trump aligns with that, then fantastic. I'm willing to support you, but willing to disagree when that comes up. I would really encourage you to take a look at that to really understand kind of the most modern iterations of that study. But really taking time to listen, understand incentives, and build policy collectively from the beginning is the recipe for success with conservatives. Thank you.
All right. Hello again, everyone. Ryan here. And you can go to the next slide, Kiva. We'll jump right in. Okay, so my background's in mediation and de-escalation, violence de-escalation. And the work that I'll be sharing with you here today is I was recently the project coordinator for a project called Cure PNW, which was a DHS, Department of Homeland Security funded project to prevent violent extremism and toxic polarization in the Pacific Northwest. So that was basically from Portland, Oregon to about Olympia, Washington. And the core inspiration for me emotionally in doing this work was how can we engage those who need depolarization the most, such as those prone to violence and extremism, such as those people who are not in the room today, who will not voluntarily self-select and show up at a bridge building event or any of the events that any of us might hold. How do we reach those people? Where do we meet them? How do we engage them? And so that was what really fueled me. All right, next slide. All right, so the approach we use at Cure PNW was what we call a public health approach from a nonprofit called Cure Violence Global. And Cure Violence Global has done a lot of work all over the world and in major US cities dealing with gang and community violence. And the crux of this approach is finding and recruiting what we call credible messengers. So the credible messenger, or the CM, are individuals who have trusted social ties to those who may be at risk of committing violence or who have experienced trauma by way of seeing someone else who's been exposed to violence or who have themselves experienced violence. And the credible messengers use their credibility and social trust to do three things. The first is to de-escalate those ready to do violence now. This is what we call acute de-escalation. Someone's ready to go shoot something up. The credible messenger will step in and say, "Hey, Bob, let's take a deep breath. Have you eaten today? Let's go get a cheeseburger," that kind of thing, and get the person to not commit the act. The second one is the more social worky aspect, which is to work with individuals long term to help address any issue in their life that might be motivating them to commit violence. So this could be anything from looking at what their needs are, what kind of resource lacks they have in their life, are they alienated, do they have trauma, and having one-on-one, like coffee date, long-term, long-form conversations with people to help move their life in a direction that will get them to lose interest in committing violence or engaging in hyperpolarizing behavior. And the last one is changing community norms and narratives around violence in their entire community ecosystem, right? So this is the leadership work. This is the long-term picture of steering away from narratives or norms that might inspire people or rile people up to commit a violent act. So these are the three things that the credible messengers were tasked with doing. All right, next slide. So this is the challenge that I was presented with when I was doing this project. And this was from 2021 till 2025, spring of last year. So when I first joined the Cure PNW project, my team was basically all urban and liberal, located mostly in Portland and Seattle. And we had no connections to any conservatives, no connections to any rural groups geographically, or anyone who had any ties to extreme or violent groups or individuals. So no connections with Antifa, neo-Nazis, Proud Boys, Three Percenters, whatever group that we were concerned about. And I had just moved from Oregon to the town I live in now, Toledo, which is between Portland and Seattle. And I did not know anyone in this town, and we had no connection. So I was basically brought on to find people in the wild. I don't even know the names of towns. I have GPS, that's all I got. And so it's time to run around like a maniac and meet random people and try to build a team to actually execute this project. So now I'll share with you what I did and what I've learned. All right, next slide. So the first tactic that I developed was I built what I called a meta credible messenger team. So meta is we're stepping one step back from finding credible messengers. We're going to hire people to go and find credible messengers. So I hired friends of mine and people who I found were skilled in dialogue, who had a kind of extroverted personality and were motivated to find and recruit credible messengers to attend public events, protests, school board meetings, political conference, any kind of space, especially spaces where public conflict could occur or even violence. And these people were paid by the hour plus a bonus if they identified someone that we would eventually hire. I would do the final vetting and interview. So they would identify the person, exchange phone numbers with them, and they would then pass them off to me. And then I'd have coffee with them and see if they were a good fit for the team. And so the goal was to spot people who had credibility with specific groups that we needed to reach and who valued or were skilled in depolarization and de-escalation skills. And then the meta credible messengers would do all of this coffee dates, rapport building, hanging out, getting phone numbers, or that kind of thing. And then we would build a relationship and then eventually recruit people to join the project as credible messengers. So that was one thing we did. Next slide. This was one of the favorite things that we invented, which my colleague called the empathy booth. We also called them, to Bo's point about language mindfulness, conversation tables or dialogue booths, or we kept on remixing the name, where we would call public venues. So we called bars in rural areas, public libraries, universities in the area, a few other public spaces, coffee shops, those kind of places. And we would set up a booth with table, cookies, coffee, chairs for people to sit down, and a provocative sign. I'll show you on the next slide, but don't go to the next slide yet. People would sit down. We'd ask them questions about polarization, violence, and extremism, and solutions. So things like, what relationships have been impacted by polarization? What is the biggest divide in our country? What do you think solutions look like? Then after the conversation, we had a feedback card. We'd give them the card. They would write down their phone number, email, and then we would, if they enjoy the conversation, we'd say, would you like to come to a community dialogue event? And then we would get a bunch of people who were interested, send out an email, organize a date, and then launch a community dialogue event in a library from people organically, basically picked off the street, like literally. And this was really fun. Conversations would last 15 minutes to 2.5 hours as people would just eat cookies and drink coffee. So you can go to the next slide and we'll show you a picture of what this looked like. So we had this sign in the back, let's talk what is dividing us. Incidentally, the colleague I was doing this with, she's a flight attendant. So she was very skilled at pouring coffee and handing out cookies to people and snacks. If people didn't want to stop by for cookies and coffee, we'd give them a Werther's treat for the road. And then the next person would come and sit down. So we were doing a lot of these. All right, next slide. Free community training. So I had a real fun time just basically making a whole bunch of different trainings on anything that could relate to violence prevention, depolarization, things like dialogue skills, de-escalation, community norm change, what I called transformative dialogue, addressing mis and disinformation in a creative way that's not polarizing. And then I would basically give free trainings to libraries, community colleges, anywhere where people would be motivated, self-select into the training, and then through the training, through breakout groups, Q&A, coming to talk to me afterwards, we would find people to recruit to join the project. So this included things like building a volunteer base of de-escalators and credible messengers. And at the same time, we're providing value to the community by equipping people with these kind of skills to go and do the work in their own field of life. All right, and next slide. The other thing we did was we did community surveys. So we conducted over 100 surveys with anyone we could find. The surveys were 1 to 2 hours, and we asked deep questions about violence, depolarization, connections people had, skills they used, what their motivations were. And we paid people a stipend to participate. I'm Japanese and Japanese culturally. I don't like to bother people for their time for 1 or 2 hours for free. So having a stipend to pay participants who completed the survey motivated me to even ask people. And the survey was actually an excuse to start conversations and identify and recruit a team as well. So we were able to find really interesting people from doing these surveys and building this network of depolarization and de-escalation in the area. All right, next slide. We also worked with community-based organizations. So we had $150,000 to give to 8 CBOs. So these included evangelical churches, synagogues, civic groups, journalist startups, LGBTQ tea shops, the Bipartisan Cafe in Portland, restorative justice nonprofits, even Braver Angels in Oregon. And the idea was we would work within their existing mission, right? So depending on what their mission and scope of work was, we would then jointly design community events, trainings, and workshops. We would do things like film screenings. We did like the Joy or Die and civic engagement documentary. Synagogue did one on the Israel-Gaza peace attempts projects. And then joint events for the larger community, like community colleges in Portland. Some of the pastors at the churches would give sermons about bridge building and depolarization. So finding all kind of creative ways to smuggle these skills into things that people were already doing, right? So the LGBTQ tea shop, we brought activists together with local police to have safer pride events. With the journalist group, it was a de-escalation training and creative ways to combat misinformation when people are in the field doing work and interviewing people. So these are different ways of creatively smuggling these skills into organizations where their mission might not explicitly be about depolarization, but the impact, the effect is de facto depolarization and bridge building. All right, and let's get to some of the next slides. So my philosophy is work with people on their own terms, on their own turf. So for me, this means entering into the worldviews, values, needs, and goals of others and work from there. What I want to avoid is expecting people to jump into my frame and to adopt the goggles with which I see the world through, and to avoid one-size-fits-all approaches, right? So the idea is that these trainings, conversations I have with people are hyper-tailored to their needs, right? So for example, if an organization wants a training, I would get as much information about them as I can. I'd find someone credible to partner with, and the training would be delivering these skills and ideas to groups that met them exactly where they were, right? What motivations do they already have that I could talk to, and then that would sponsor their effort to do this kind of work in their own unique way. So in other words, working with people where they already are, not where I wish they were. All right, next slide. So this is one of my favorite books I always mention called Obliquity: Why Our Goals Are Best Achieved Indirectly. And this is what's called the oblique approach. So the oblique approach is that complex problems are best solved indirectly or accidentally, right? So a complex problem I'm defining as a problem with many causes, and all of these causal elements are entangled together. You can't linearly disentangle it, like disassembling a car and putting it back together. So many problems are caused accidentally, right? So for example, polarization is accidentally caused by social media, by algorithms. You have social network siloing, you have different human nature tendencies, you have political problems, you have democracy problems, institutional problems. So if problems are caused inadvertently, why can't solutions also be caused accidentally? And the idea with this is that different actions in a system can converge towards the same outcome, which means that groups can be worked with on their own terms, on their own turf, right? If people are working within their own scope organically, that means that we can design strategies to work together doing different things for the same effect. So go to the next slide. All right, so the conventional theory of change that a lot of people do, and there's nothing wrong with this conventional theory of change, is that you have different stakeholder groups all converging on the same action for the same intended result. So for example, we were working with Christian pro-life activists. So one model of change would be my team works with Christian pro-life activists. We all team up, get in the room, design the same course of action, and get the same intended result, which is to stop violence or prevent polarization. This is one theory of change. Then go to the next slide. This is the oblique approach. So this is where both stakeholder groups do different things, but the actions are done in such a way where the unintended impact is achieving one goal, while their intended impact is achieving another goal. So the pro-life activists were protesting outside of Planned Parenthood. I drove up and said, how's it going? How's your day going? That kind of thing. And they would share with me, like, for the most part, these conversations with people are going well. However, one time someone drove on the side of the road and ran over our pro-life sign and almost killed one of us. I said, oh my God, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I said, how are these conversations with people going who walk by that you engage with? What kind of tactics? What have you found successful? And then I told them about some of the work I do at violence de-escalation and ended up giving them a training. So their goal is still to end abortion and to persuade people into a pro-life position. That was not our organization's goal. Our goal was to stop violence, but they were able to do so, have these conversations in a way where de-escalation was the impact and not escalation. So their unintended impact fulfilled our goal, even though their main goal was still political advocacy, if that makes sense. All right, next slide for the crazy diagram. So the big picture whole of society approach could be every stakeholder group has their own intended outcome, which might not be depolarization, but they pursue the outcome in a way where the de facto impact is bridge building. And so that was working with each community on their own terms, on their own turf, mapping out their interests, mapping out their strategies, and then co-designing a course of action that achieved their goal and achieved my goal. So this is what's this big noodle spaghetti crazy thing. Graphic design is not my strong point. Thanks for bearing with me. Trying to depict. All right, one more slide. All right, I'm going to be really honest with you guys, and you guys can roast me if you want to, and I'm here for that. Vulnerabilities and challenges. I did not always disclose my role or what I was doing. I use selective transparency. So this means when I went into some very dangerous places where people were arrested for threatening mass shootings based on people who want to do extreme things for political violence, I didn't always tell them, hi, I'm Ryan from Cure Violence Global, Cure PNW project funded by Homeland Security. I'm worried you guys are going to commit violence. I want to do something about it, right? I had to say different things and build rapport, but I didn't disclose my role transparently. That was very stressful for me, and I'm still processing how to navigate that. I don't have all the answers. I tried the blunt approach, and I was not only immediately shut down, but there were situations that are actually dangerous. So this is kind of what I had to do. And then the other thing was that we had a lot of money to be able to use. So just for transparency, we had $1.7 million over several years. And so without compensating people to engage in this work, none of this was possible. So my open-ended question to everyone here, participants and panelists, is how do we build and hold diverse networks together where people have intrinsic motivation to continue working together, not just working together because of getting paid, right? Getting paid is really helpful to start that process, but the intrinsic motivation of I want to hang out with and work with people who are very different from me because it's fun and energizing and important. I'll do that on my own without pay. My team did not stay together after the payment ran out. So I'm still meditating on that one. All right, and last slide. So the final result of the project was we had 8 credible messengers, 4 on the left, 4 on the right, and these included things like gunsmiths with Proud Boy connections, anarchists, rural conservative pastors, trans women, a Jewish person after October 7th, people who specialize in Black advocacy, ex-military. We had every race, religion, generation, ideology, and geographical location represented. And we trained over 700 individuals in depolarization skills, violence prevention, and anything related. And some of the community-based organizations like the evangelical churches are still implementing their programming. So I think we did good work in that amount of time holding the team together. Did we have fights? Absolutely. Did we have arguments over wordsmithing and aesthetics for flyers? Absolutely. I had to really flex my mediation skills, but it was definitely worth it. So you can contact me at ryanakata@gmail.com. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you so much to all those speakers for sharing more about your work. We're going to move into the panel conversation now. And ahead of time, we asked each of the panelists to come up with at least one question for another panelist, rooted in curiosity about how they approach this work. The goal here isn't to agree or to resolve differences, but to surface how experienced practitioners think, question, and learn from each other in real time. As a note, after this conversation, we'll open up things and bring in questions from the Q&A, as well as a few themes and questions that were shared ahead of time in the pre-event survey, so we can connect this discussion more directly to the situations that many of you are navigating. As you listened, and this is opening up now to the presenters, as you listen to one another's presentations, what's a question that came up for you about how someone else approaches this work? And I will open it up to each of you to come off of mute and to share your questions.
I can kick it off
Beautiful, please.
since I just talked. I had a question for Bo about the language part, because this was a big challenge in the work that I did, where we had a lot of fights, and it became a weird, kind of a weird dynamic where progressives would use those kind of words and the conservatives would get mad at them. So there was kind of like a reverse policing of words kind of a thing going on too. And how do you, maybe this is the wrong framing, but how do you get people to be aware of that and not do that? Because for a lot of people, where their community is so used to that type of language, it's such an ingrained habit, like neurologically, that it's hard to break or catch yourself.
Yeah, and it's a difficult question because the impetus to use it is a good one. It's to be inclusive and to show care and support and all of those positive things that we normally think. But with a Republican political audience, it doesn't sit well, and it's because they feel judged, they feel threatened, they feel, I mean, they've been called racists and bigots so many times for so many years that, it's just like, okay, say it again. That I mean that it almost becomes irrelevant. And then when you say, if you don't use this language, then you're racist or bigoted, then they just kind of roll their eyes and like, okay, again. So being able to find connection, if that's sincerely your interest, um, one way to do that is just to minimize those words. I mean, it's not that, I mean, if that's how you speak and that's your vocabulary and that's the way you think of the world, then don't change who you are or your morals or beliefs or anything else. That's not the point. The point is just to be of the aware of your audience and who you're speaking to and to do that as thoughtfully as you would with any other audience.
And other panelists, you're also welcome to respond if you have additional thoughts. Otherwise, you're welcome to jump in with a question for another presenter.
Well, yeah, I'll add on to what Bo shared, and there's some explicit examples in what I wrote for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, but I think exactly as Bo shared, it's a matter of consciousness, just being aware of, what is your goal? And I think there's a real danger as more and more words, I mean, God knows, it feels like all of them are sucked into this toxic vortex. They're colored, if you will, red or blue. It's not so much about the word itself, it's about that word immediately labeling you in your audience's eyes, in someone's eyes, as, oh, got it, they're one of those people, and shutting down that opportunity to connect. So if you are somebody who wants to connect, be trusted, be resonant across divides, you just got to be really conscious of it. Otherwise, you're not even going to be able to open the conversation at all. I'll throw some practical ones real quick from that piece. So if we're coming from more of a liberal frame and some of the words that are more popular and common, and as Ryan said, just how many of my friends who are liberal are used to speaking in their spaces. Maybe if you're trying to resonate with folks who don't share that tribal dialect, instead of saying diversity, you might try variety. That's what you'll hear me saying a lot. You might try different backgrounds and beliefs. Instead of equity, maybe it's fairness. Instead of inclusion, how about welcoming and belonging? Instead of safe spaces, we can talk about welcoming all views, being judgment-free, extending grace, being a supportive environment, respectful space. Instead of justice, which might be coded blue, fairness, right and wrong. Instead of marginalized, mistreated, left out. And to Bo's point, instead of racist, which of course is loaded for good reason, maybe we talk about hateful, judging, condescending, prejudiced, discriminatory. again, it's about your goal and whether you want to open up and leave as many channels of trust and receptivity open or shut them down with a word that unfortunately these days can label us as one thing or another.
I'll add on, and then I can ask a question as well if we're ready. But the only thing that I would add from our work at Essential Partners is that we really want to work with people whose lives and futures are intertwined, and they get to choose what matters to them. So in some places, language might matter a lot. And some where I remember we were uh, facilitating conversations on abortion, and they spent the first two sessions deciding what language they were going to use to talk about themselves and the other. And they landed on pro-choice and pro-life, but it took 5 hours of conversations for them to get there. In other spaces, there might be more trust or there might be more space to kind of collectively navigate that together. So I always hesitate to, in our work, to say, here's what conservatives like, here's what conservatives don't like, here's what liberals like, here's what liberals don't like, here's the language that we use, because each community is so different. And language might mean something different to each person. But I do think that what you can do is you can say, what will help you engage best in this conversation? What will, and to ask people that, what will help you participate fully in this conversation? And it's totally fair for people to say, I don't want to have language used that I don't understand the meaning of, like pedagogy or academies or kind of leftist or right-leaning language. It's totally fine for people to say, I don't want to be called a racist, in which case it's less about language and more about how do we talk about impact? How do we talk about the actions that we have? How do we talk about what matters to us in ways that mean something? And so we might design questions differently or design the conversation differently. And so I really like this framing of language. And I also my invitation for people is always just to ask people, like, what do you need for this? Let's make it happen. And if people need fundamentally different things, that's when you can take a step back and say, hey, is this the right conversation to have, or is this what we should be doing? If it's good, I can ask another question because I have a question for Ryan. I love, and it's possible that you were talking about two different things, but I love that you both led community dialogues and your explicit focus is in violence prevention and kind of going to the fringes of looking at people who are either likely to become extremists or perceived as extremists. Have you done community dialogue with folks who are perceived as extremists amongst themselves? Like how and kind of to what purpose or impact? Like I would love to hear more about that and how that has made a difference for you in your work.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. Great question. So the interesting thing was Curvine's Global's methodology comes out of gang violence, and you actually don't bring Crips and Bloods together for dialogue. You don't bring MS-13 and 18th Street together for dialogue. You have credible messengers work actually in their own lane. So that was 80% of the stated method or approach. Most of the work that I did do doing that was at protests. So protests where Antifa and Proud Boys were fighting, I would literally get in there and have to de-escalate people and talk to people and that kind of thing. And those were some kind of wild stories of going to, my favorite memory is going to a Pride event in the summer, standing on the sidewalk for 2 hours, talking to Proud Boys and talking to a bunch of people where I was able to kind of troll people a little bit so they got angry at me and then I could de-escalate them, right? So then they kind of surrounded me, which is what I wanted, so they wouldn't attack Antifa. And I started engaging them in philosophical conversations about the Bible and Christianity, which I was really enjoying. And at one point, the guy stopped and said, "Hey, you ask really good questions." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I'm just really curious, and I'm curious what you have to say about this." And then half an hour later, I actually found out that one of the guys was from Hawaii, where I'm from. I'm like, "Bro, no ways." Like, bro, you want to go down, get one local mocha right now, like down street, So there's all kind of interesting things that can come out of that, and actually ended up keeping in touch with people and kind of building that. But in terms of the people who were engaged in aggressive advocacy, like doxing, brick throwing, yeah, we didn't do any explicit community dialogues bringing them together. We did do dialogues bringing people who were connected to the groups who might believe in the ideology on an idea level, but we're not actually doing brick throwing, we're not actually doing doxing, we're not actually doing hostile activity together. That makes sense.
Thanks
But
so
we
much.
did do anarchist and nationalist, and we did do police and Antifa, and we did do those kind of things. But those people are probably less likely to take physical action.
And Ryan, just briefly, since you're on the floor right now, folks were asking about where you got your funding. Is it right that most of it was from the Department of Homeland Security?
Yeah, so this was Homeland Security in the Biden administration, not the current Trump administration. So the climate and connotation around that in the period that I worked was probably very different from what it is now.
Great, thanks.
It was the Homeland Security, like their counterterrorism division.
Great, thanks.
So, Bo, like me, you worked in the politics industry, fighting explicitly for partisan victory. So, I'm really curious how folks you worked with in those days, they might be still be doing that really important work, reacted to your new focus on bridging divides.
It's been interesting because I'm probably older than you might expect and been around for a long time. And a lot of the guys that I kind of came along with grew up in the era of Ronald Reagan, George Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, sort of Republicans. And that was their foundation for 20 plus years. And then Trump is a pretty radical departure from that. Some people you know, took that departure and kind of went on that new lane. But there's a lot of the people that I was colleagues with and friends with during that time who also didn't feel comfortable. And so I think you see a lot of the new political operatives on the right are often the younger ones who the Trump era is really all that they've known, in terms of their political adulthood. So it's interesting that more and more of the operatives there are younger, and that more of the ones that are kind of my generation, have some misgivings just because of the way that the party was when we came along in it.
Thanks.
I'm interested though to hear some of your thoughts in rural areas and there seems to be a real emerging theme on the right, or for the last several years, of elites versus regular people. And that I think that's partly driven by changing economics. The Republican voters are becoming uh, less educated and lower income, and Democrat voters are becoming higher educated and higher income, um, aggregately. Um, and how you see that kind of put that kind of dynamic of elites versus regular people playing out in urban versus rural contexts.
Yeah, thanks. I think these last presidential election results and crosstabs, which may only mean something to me and Bo. But looking at how individual demographics voted really scrambled some of our assumptions going in about what those most rigid and stable fault lines were across the electorate. And again, as you're alluding to, Bo, I think what we saw is class divide becoming much more salient in some cases than race, gender, and others. So just from an electoral perspective, I think that's fascinating. There's a good news column there. Like, oh, cool. All right, we're a little more fluid on some of those divides than we thought we were when it comes to our voting behavior. But indeed, this one of class, which of course can correlate highly with urban versus rural, is becoming more dominant. And I think, I haven't seen anything that doesn't confirm what we're seeing nationally in terms of a distrust of those people. Maybe those people are a different party. Maybe they're those folks in the city. Maybe they are the folks in government. Because I think a lot of us as Americans right now feel like things are happening to us. Feel like things, unjustly are happening to us. We're not getting a fair shake. We don't have sufficient authority. Some force, and everybody's them is different, but some force is doing us dirty. And absolutely that has come up a lot in the urban and rural work is rural folks writ large feeling like, and I grew up in a really small town. I'm blessed to be back in a smaller town now. Um, Feel like they don't have much of a voice, and that all the attention and energy and funding and influence is going to more populous places. So folks feel left out. They want to feel that folks see them with dignity, that they belong, that they have a place in the future. And I think that's maybe a takeaway for all of this work is, whenever we're wondering, gosh, why won't those darn folks, whatever they are, whatever stripes we're talking about, why won't they get on board? It may be because we, the speaker or the party platform or whatever it may be, are not giving them a sufficiently secure sense of what their place is in the future that we're envisioning, in the future that we're fighting for. And I think that's where any of us advancing social change and strengthening our communities can fall short, as if somebody looks at what we're selling and says, yeah, but where am I? I feel like this is only for those people and not for my people.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for sharing more of your questions and perspectives. And we also are bringing in a request to respond to some of the events that have been happening this week. Before we turn to these audience questions, I want to ground this conversation in this next part of the panel discussion in the reality that some people are living in right now. This week's events in Minnesota are one example of how quickly political, moral, and institutional tensions can escalate, especially when fear, power, and a competing narrative collide. For those who may not be familiar, earlier this week, a shooting involving law enforcement in Minnesota led to a person's death, followed by rapidly spreading video, intense public reaction, and sharply divided narratives about what occurred. We're not going to unpack the details of this situation here. We're raising Minnesota as one example of the kinds of moments when political, moral, and emotional stakes escalate very quickly, and when people often ask whether and how engagement across difference is even possible. So to the presenters, what does it look like to model grounded human engagement in moments like this, even when consensus isn't possible or agreement isn't the goal?
That's a hard one. I think that because everyone's emotions are high, and this isn't the first thing to raise them. You know, this is just the latest thing to raise them, and but I think that one place when tensions are very high with very different perspectives on each side partisan, and I think kind of the most recent other example would be the Charlie Kirk shooting. Um, where there's just a wildly different interpretation from the right and the left of what that incident means and is about and how it happened, etc. And people take to social media, and it's, I think that is one place that a regular person can try to help calm the waters, and not further inflame at least. Um, I think talking with family members, or very close, trusted friends who might have a slightly different opinion, but somebody who you already have that level of trust built and connected with. In my case, it's my sister, you know, that we can have that conversation and know that it's going to be okay and help me understand how and why she's feeling the way she is. And I can help her understand how and why I'm feeling the way I am. Um, so starting local, in terms of having those conversations with close, trusted people, and then on a broader scale on social media, just trying to be as respectful and limited in inflaming that as possible, and to the extent that you can try to bring some peace there, attempt to.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, Bill, because I agree with the local, start local. I I don't know that you have to necessarily, from my perspective, have to have it be with a trusted person. However, I think one of the two things that we know to be true, One is that you have to create space for people to have a very purpose-driven conversation. A conversation about what happened in Minneapolis this week that is about grieving and processing is very different from one that's about taking action, is very different from one that's about a larger kind of question about what safety looks like in our community and what we're going to do next. Right. And so one thing that we know to be true is that in most cases, especially if you're in a space where you are leading, facilitating, that often saying nothing is worse than at least acknowledging what has happened, and then opening up a space that you can close. We love to say at Essential Partners, like, don't open something that you can't close. Give space, people a space to process in a purposeful way, and then know where you're going to end. Not necessarily here's the decision or here's the common ground, but here's how we can move forward together, whether it's this class, this team, this community, this book club, this PTA. And I think for us, that can work alongside other forms of engagement. I saw a question here around rallies and protests as well. How does rallies and protests play in with this? For us, it can be a both and. We've worked with people who are actively advocating for a particular side and who want to be in relationship, whose lives and futures are intertwined because it's their community, because it's their school, it's their congregation. We've worked with so many synagogues after October 7th that are really worried that they're going to fully split up, right? And we're going to see that over and over again, that these fission points can actually create gaps that can't be healed. And so communities split apart or people lose that sense of connection and belonging. And so how do we have these conversations in a way that allow us to become closer together? I think in moments like these are really important to do so on people's terms and to have enough of a container. We love a communication agreement. So we love inviting people to pass or pass for now if they're not ready to respond, if they don't have anything to add. If they are, as I saw people on the chat, kind of either afraid to engage or have a low level of trust or don't feel connected. And then over time, you start to see people having those conversations more organically. So I love the starting local. It's so hard to do this on social media. I love becoming active and engaged in your community and not having that be instead of dialogue, but alongside dialogue. And how do we connect this? Exactly what Bo said earlier. How do we create spaces for collaboration and connection, even if we don't have common ground?
One thing,
Such important wisdom. I'll just simply share what over the years have become my six favorite tips that I think are as valuable, if not more so now in these hotter, most contentious moments. Seek dignity across differences. Listen with curiosity. Suspend judgment and extend grace. Assume good intentions. Speak from your own experience and connect with respect. It's what I'm working on every day. And I think reminding ourselves of those and continue to try to practice them, especially when it's hard, is the way we can get through these moments together.
one thing that I think is important to remember too is that we have a very, very fractured information landscape. Even if you and I subscribe to the same people on Threads or Twitter, we're going to get a different feed because of how long you linger, which ones you click on. Um, Much less, the other media that we consume through TV and podcasts and what we see, what we click on from our friends on social media, I mean, we have truly a bespoke information system for every single person in the country. And a lot of that is algorithm driven. A lot of that just reinforces existing stereotypes and beliefs. There was a fascinating thing I saw. This was several months ago now, but they took the front page of the New York Times and the front page of FoxNews.com for a week. There was not a single story of overlap on the front page of either of those two things for a week.
Wow.
So if you're reading the New York Times, you have no information virtually about what Fox News is covering. And if you watch Fox News, you have no information about what the New York Times is covering. And so we're getting very, very different pieces of information and sources of information about all of this as well.
I'll just say one thing really quickly to juxtapose with what Bo was saying was I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie in one very specific area, and that's protest de-escalation. So anytime things are getting hot or groups of people are gathering, you have protesters, counter protesters, law enforcement, et cetera. I like to jump in there, ideally with other people and talk to people in the moment. And just giving a shout out to peace teams, like different peace teams that exist in cities or in different states where they actually are volunteer run and they go to hotspots and protests and do this kind of work. And some peace teams were vests. I usually just show up as a concerned citizen. And so I'm not identifiable as a peace team person because some people have the concerns about the peace police phenomena. So I just show up and I talk to people. And I'll just say this from my own experience doing this hundreds of times. There is a weird magical thing about even if it's one or two or three people having a calm, rational, compassionate conversation in the middle of the storm has, I swear to God, some kind of metaphysically de-escalatory presence on the entire field of what's going on, you know? And to be there, just talking, having a long form conversation with people, Proud Boys Antifa, ICE, whatever, and just being in that space, navigating that well can go a really long way. And I've seen violence prevented countless times, even if it's just one person pepper spray brick hitting someone with a bat, punching, like that has a contagion effect that could lead to so many more bad things. So people who do like that kind of work, I encourage you to find a peace team or try it with some people and see what kind of difference you can make in the community.
Thank you all so much for this panel discussion. I'm going to pass it off to Duncan to bring in some of the questions that we've received.
Great. So yeah, I've been working over here to try to distill out some of the questions from our pre-survey and here. And I think one question I would love to get for folks to touch on is how do you actually motivate people to come participate in bridging work? Like, why do they want to? There's variations of this, or people are noticing that it's hard to get people to participate. And I suppose similarly, like, yeah, what are your tricks on how to make the invitations appealing and interesting for people to actually want to talk to each other?
For us, it's a little bit different. And I would say this is my recommendation for anyone as well, that start where you are. This for us, people show up when something is important enough and urgent enough to them. And so that's why we work where people are already living, working, studying, and worshiping together, because parents will show up for a conversation about whether a school should keep a salutatorian and valedictorian program in place. Um, you know, students will show up for a conversation about mental health at school, right? And when the conversation is connected to your live experience in a place, people show up. It also means that you can actually build in routines and spaces for that to become part of the norm. So one of the schools that we're working with just used dialogue for strategic planning after having very intense conversations about their mascot. And so it becomes you start with one thing, and then people say, I really liked this. Can we do it again here? I really like this. Can we do it again here? We have the luxury of not necessarily having the challenge of whether you can continue paying people or not, because people are already in that space. They're either hopefully already getting paid to be there if they're on staff, or if they're a teacher, they're a student there, they're a member of a congregation, they're a member of their Y, whatever it might be. If people are already showing up to that place and they already have a stake in that place, we look for important enough and urgent enough. Is this issue important enough for you? Is this urgent enough for you to show up today?
I'll just echo what Katie's saying because I've been the guy that really, 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 really wanted to find a way to get millions of people to show up at a Bridging Divides event. And I learned through a lot of market research that this whole, Bo, we're in it together, brother, but there aren't that many people that are like, listen first, sweet. That sounds exciting. And what we found in the messaging research across several different kind of prompts and frames for the work is exactly what Katie said. Just to be very literal about it, the frame that across all demographic groups across the country was most resonant and attractive was, quote, an opportunity to work together to fix things we broadly agree are broken. That's what Katie's talking about.
I'll just jump in to double down on my methodology, but for me, the credible messenger thing was indispensable. Having people who are trusted, who have a strong reputation in the community, the people that we work with, the pastors in rural areas who could, if they ran for mayor, they would instantly win. Those people were the MVP recruiters to big community events. I could have definitely never pulled off anything like that by myself, no matter how skilled I was, because this guy had literally 50 years of building community in that location. So to me, it's that finding those critical nodes and working around them.
I mean, one example I give sometimes is I grew up in Alabama, and all along the Gulf Coast, North Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, um, East Texas, hurricane prone, and because of climate change, they're getting more and more hurricanes all the time. Uh, Homeowner and property insurance rates are doubling every few years. You call a town hall community meeting to talk about climate change, and you have two people show up with their hippie t-shirt on. You call a community town hall meeting to talk about property insurance rates, and you have standing room only, and you're discussing the same thing. So find out how people are impacted by things and what they care about and why they care about that. And that can really open some bridges, I think, as well.
Wonderful. I'm going to bundle another little pile of questions here. So, questions related to how do you engage across differences without legitimizing harm or power imbalances is like one layer of this question. Or how do you deal with debates about whether or not we should or should not talk to those people, whoever that might be? And then, or maybe just like, when is bridging the right move? When is it not the right move? And there's a great question that just popped up here is like, can there actually be too much peace? Like, are we trying to actually make that happen?
You don't want to sit down with somebody who you think is a racist entity to say, let's co-create a policy that can be half normal and half racist, right? That makes no sense. What you're wanting to do is to create a policy that isn't racist, but that everybody can agree helps solve a problem. And coming into it, with a framework of, I want to seek collaboration, um, but it is critical and wanting to understand how other people seek to solve a problem as well, rather than leading with your own predetermined solution is, I think, one of the keys.
I think what I often say, I love all of that. I think what I often say too is it depends on your purpose and it depends on your stakes. So one of our practitioners, our facilitators in the field, she's been with us for many, many years. She was a Black Panther and will openly say, yeah, I dialogue with the KKK. And every time she says that, part of me is like, good for you. I'm so glad. You don't have to. You don't have to do that. It's what's your purpose and what's at stake. And who can you work with to have that purpose? So you can, if it is your purpose and if you have something at stake, dialogue with people with whom you think you can make a difference, with whom you think you can build a community or build the future that you want. And that's always where we start. What is your purpose and who needs to be in the room in order for that to happen? Now, the other piece that I'll say is so many times people will say to me if I'm leading a dialogue, can you make sure that I can't get fired for what I say? Can you make sure that I won't lose my job or be expelled based off of what I say? And as a facilitator, I generally say, I can't promise that. I can't promise that 6 months from now that you are asked to leave this place because of what you said 6 months ago. But how do we build up enough trust for you to feel like you can participate in that conversation on your own terms? And if you can't, how do we shift the purpose of the conversation to start where you're at, to start where you are and make sure that you can participate in a conversation where you feel like you can speak what you need to speak and hopefully make a difference in your community. So I would say those are the two sides of the coin that I would say. Absolutely, you can dialogue, you can do it as long as you have a purpose and you think a shared purpose and you have the right people in the room to accomplish that purpose and you have enough safety in that space so that people can participate fully without having to worry about, at best, their job and at worst, their personal safety, right?
Yeah, I'll just say too, people have different burnout thresholds, and so just being mindful of that, like especially if this is voluntary and you're engaged citizen, and you're no use to it's burning out is just it happens all the time in this space. I just want to name that, acknowledge that, take care of yourself. The other thing I'll say too, just as another variable for me, is I have developed a chronic health problem, so I've had to significantly scale back what I've been doing, and so haven't been doing the action-packed stuff that I used to do several years ago. And something I've thought a lot about too is for me personally, my eccentric thing is the more kind of wild the person's ideology, the more interesting it is to me. So like neo-Nazi, flat earther, whatever, I want to be your friend and hear all about your life and why you believe that. But for me, the other factor, given I have low energy these days, is the person's personality. Like if the person is really abrasive and they're not gonna, to me, that's a bigger like I don't have the capacity to have that rather than the content of what they are saying or believing, right? I've talked to people who have really crazy ideologies and they're really good at conversation. They're respectful, they're polite. They ask me open-ended questions, right? White supremacists asking me open-ended questions about my life and growing up in a Japanese Buddhist temple in Hawaii. Great, I'll tell you, man. But if people are just going to be really obnoxious or something that could be a net drain, that's not worth it sometimes.
Amazing.
I
We're gonna
love that.
squeeze.
Oh, can I just say really
Yeah.
quickly, you get to, like, I love you saying that, Ryan, because you get to decide your own boundaries. And that's something that I tell people all the time. Like, you get to decide. You don't have to show up for the thing that's going to make you miserable. So I really appreciate Ryan saying that and just wanted to drill it home because it is really awful when people feel like they have to do it, even if it causes them harm or is not worth it. Sorry, Duncan.
No, no problem. No, this is great. So I'm gonna throw one more out here, and this is a kind of question like, how do you deal with when misinformation comes into play, or people are stating falsehoods, or what happens when there's mistrust, or people don't have the same sense of reality, or people have a different sense of objective reality, and so forth, which is relevant to this week as well. So before you all get a chance to answer that, I did just drop in the chat. On February 3rd, we'll be having another session in this series where we're really going to be talking about how do you facilitate sense making when people have a lot of different ideas of what reality is. So for folks that are interested, come check it out. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And this, I think, will be our last question. And for those who are wondering, like, oh my gosh, there's so many great questions here. We're going to be building resource pages after this, and we'll try to answer some of these, and we'll get some of these folks to do it. So stay tuned for the post-event materials coming at you. Yeah. All right. Hard question, quick answer. Yeah.
I can just throw out really quickly. I think for me, what has been helpful is to pivot to their reasoning process about why they trust or don't trust something rather than trying to adjudicate the truth. So I don't have a science background. During COVID with vaccines or the nature of the virus, I tried reading everything from every perspective. I had no idea how any of these, I don't have a biology, I don't have a college degree, right? I don't understand that. It all comes down to why I would trust or not trust something. And so that to me is where I take the conversation next, right? So, like, for example, saying, so you trust this, that this is true. It sounds like, but you don't trust that this is, tell me your reasoning process. Why select this institution trust here, not this one here? To me is a more interesting conversation than just trying to adjudicate the facts when I don't actually even know how those facts are produced sometimes.
First of all, I think we got to stay really conscious just as individuals. Probably as bridging practitioners, we wouldn't be doing this anyway. But anytime that we are going into an argument with all of our facts ready to go, there's something called backfire effect. And it's just our own human defense system saying, whoa, 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 now you think I'm stupid. I am digging in. And I could be saying the most outlandish things in the world, but it doesn't matter because I'd rather say that than admit that you are right and I am wrong and I feel stupid and less valuable as a human being. So good luck if you're going in thinking you're going to convince somebody with facts. That's not how us humans are built. And I think beyond that, just as I mentioned, speaking from your own experience, I think as Ryan was touching on, can be really important here. So look, if the conversation we're having is about what happened in Minnesota, that's tough. But I think we can get to a more personal and less positional level if we're saying, hey, Katie, why did that hit especially hard for you? What folks do you see in this situation that you can relate to? What harms are Kurt Gray in his book Outraged? What harms are we most sensitive to as individuals? Which ones are we keying in on and maybe have natural blind spots to others? So really trying to get personal. How is somebody experiencing that, perceiving that, and don't waste your time trying to litigate what is true and what is false.
I'm 100%. That's often what we do as well. That's so wise. The other thing I'd say is that if you have the luxury of being in relationship or in community for a long time, and science and facts are really important, we've done a couple of things to help bring those in intentional ways. One, we've invited each kind of side or group to invite someone in to speak from their perspective and then collectively decide over time which of those scientists that they would kind of collectively feel okay all saying, yes, this represents good science. Um, in some cases, our activists partners would start sending their op-eds to the other side to say, look, I'm not going to change the orientation of my op-ed, but I want to make sure I'm accurately depicting you as you want to be depicted. I don't want to dehumanize you or unaccurately depict your perspective. We've also seen people collectively create a series of facts that they can all agree on and give them to journalists in their community so that the journalists use facts that they've all agreed on. So there are a few ways that you can do it, but it actually becomes part of the process. As Pierce said, not kind of a way for people to kind of volley facts back and forth that no one will listen to, but to kind of collectively create meaning together over time.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We'll be starting to wrap up this conversation. We may go a few minutes over because we want to share some opportunities that are coming up ahead of time here. So just bear with me while I share this. We would love to hear in the chat, what new insight are you taking with you? So please feel welcome to add your thoughts there. We would love to hear what is resonating, and we will also be sharing with you a post-training evaluation. I'm going to pass it off to Duncan to briefly share a little bit more about the upcoming trainings that he did mention a few moments ago, but in case you wanted to share a little bit more, we will be sharing the slide deck with you in case you want to register. Duncan, anything you'd like to add on these trainings that we have coming up?
Yeah, so we'll be having two more trainings in this series that are kind of in a similar format as this, with the cross learning between different sort of experts in these different fields. We'll be on the 22nd, we'll be talking about how to use civic technology for meaningful engagement, and we'll be hitting that from a lot of different interesting angles. And then we'll be having a session about how do you facilitate or hold conversations in complexity. And this will be mainly about like managing misinformation and getting how to get people more or less on the same page so you can actually get them into a shared conversation about it. And really look forward to having folks continue to participate. And even if you can't make it, go ahead and register because we'll be sharing again all the information there. And and there'll be some more trainings coming up as well. And if you go to the Learn Democracy online website, you can also just sign up for information. We'll make sure that you get information about the past trainings as well. And just thanks everyone for being here today. Um, and again, we'll try to answer some of these questions in the back end as well.
So if you'd like, you can pull your phone up to the QR codes. We'll also send links to signing up for these future trainings. They're available here for you. And also, this was co-hosted with NCDD. If you're looking for a home, a community with other individuals who are working to have better conversations and make more effective group decisions, I invite you to join NCDD. We offer news and resources, many of which are available for free on the website, so please do check that out. And finally, we would love your feedback. So there's a link to this evaluation survey that we can drop in the chat, as well as a QR code if you'd like to put your phone up to fill out a very brief survey. We would love to hear how this landed with you, any opportunities for improvement. The surveys can be completed anonymously, and that feedback will help to strengthen both upcoming trainings and also future events, both with the Democracy Resource Hub and with NCDD, as well as our partners, because we'll be sharing this feedback with them as well. Thank you all so much. We'll drop our contact information in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing so our presenters can send a thank you with their lovely faces. We greatly appreciate your presence, the thoughtful chat that was happening, as well as how each and every one of you are showing up every day to connect with each other and to build stronger relationships and to work to depolarize our communities and our country and our world. So happy to open it up to any of our speakers if you'd like to share some closing thoughts. Just a lot of deep gratitude from myself.
Thanks so much for being here, y'all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.
Enjoy your weekends. Take care of yourselves.